Hey, what's up YouTube? Dave from Oakos here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the BRZ platform. Anybody that ever heard me talk about my 13 BRZ that I had knows just how much I loved the car. I think it was an unbeatable value for the money as far as sports cars go. Very low center of gravity, near perfect weight distribution. It was reasonable power, but I took it straight to the racetrack, completely stock, and it held up for an entire track day. You're not going to find too many cars for under 30K that's going to do that. Now Subaru gives us all those great attributes, but refined. We get an even lower center of gravity, we get a bigger engine, more torque, more horsepower. The chassis is now 50% stiffer. They've improved the aero on the car. The interior is a lot nicer also. Let's go for a ride. With all the improvements to the new car, let's see if it can run circles around the old one. They can. Well, we know it'll do donuts, that's for sure. Let's go for a ride and we can talk about some of the specs and see how it handles on the road and in practical situations. So obviously the biggest news about Subaru's redesign is the larger engine that they put into it. A lot of people complained about the lack of torque, especially in the mid-range on the old cars. And with the 20% more displacement on this car, they've really solved that problem. So our torque is up 33 foot-pounds, and it comes on a full 2,700 RPM sooner, which makes a big difference when you're driving around town. So Subaru managed to increase the displacement by increasing the size of the pistons by 8 millimeters. The stroke remains the same. And the peak horsepower comes on still at 7,000 RPMs, which is nice because the engine still pulls cleanly all the way to redline, which really gives it a satisfying feeling and really is best for on-track performance where you're spending most of your time. The extra displacement really shows itself in the mid-range power. So here we are at maybe about 2,000 RPMs. You punch it and it pretty much goes right away. The car's gained a little bit of weight, right around 50 pounds for the base model compared to the 2013, but with the increase in power, it still managed to have an improvement in the power to weight ratio. So we'll see how much of a difference that really makes once we get it to the track. Like I said, a nice rush of top-end power. And it's not a rocket ship, we all know that, but that's not really what the car is about. The 2013 BRZ, when it came out, I thought was really a great-looking car, and I think this car improves on that slightly. So it's a car it's a Subaru that I have now that I haven't had to get used to, the styling at all, which I never cared about. You can't see that from the inside. I don't buy the cars for how they look. I buy the cars for the performance and for the fun factor. While the car looks largely unchanged on the outside, Subaru did make a lot of improvements and changes to it. It's cool that the old cars had an aluminum hood, which is always nice, but now they've added an aluminum roof and aluminum front fenders. So really they're making a big effort to take the weight off of the parts of the car that really matter the most, and that's up high and up front. On the inside of the car, I liked the old car. I thought the inside was very nice. And the new car is very similar, but pretty much everything has been updated. So the seats are very low, they have good support for me. The inside is exceptionally nicely done. There's really nothing in here that feels cheap, which for a car in this price range is a welcome plus. They got rid of the analog gauges now, and we've got a digital display that you can customize to some extent. I really appreciate how much work Subaru put into the design of this car. There's just so many fine touches, a lot of very neat and thoughtful things, especially when it comes to the performance aspects, but also just in some of the attention to detail. And one of the neat things that I actually didn't notice until I read about it somewhere else was that the bezel surround for the cluster is shaped like a boxer engine. I thought that was a really cool touch. So you have the circle in the middle and the cylinders coming out to the sides, and they even have some small notches on the sides to represent where the piston rings would be. So those would be the ring lands. Hopefully they don't break easily. The infotainment system is larger. The seat warmers work very good. I like the steering wheel in the old car. This one still is a very good design. And I found the pedal placement to be very similar to the old car, and I thought the pedal placement was perfect. It makes for easy heel and toe downshifts and rev matching, and they have enough grip to keep my feet on the pedals without feeling like they're going to slip off. One downside is the rear seats are basically useless. They're nice to store stuff back there, but they say it's a 2+2 car, but that's not going to happen. With my seat in a comfortable driving position, there's really no place for somebody to put their legs behind me, but that's fine. It gives me a place to put my gym bag or maybe my bag of donuts, whichever. I certainly didn't buy this car to be a comfortable car. I bought it because it's a fun car, and a little bit of road noise doesn't bother me too much, but I've been very impressed that the suspension can be as stiff and responsive as it is and not transmit too much noise through to the cabin. You can definitely tell, though, the difference between driving on asphalt and concrete, that on the concrete you do start to get quite a bit of tire noise, which, again, I'm not worried about. And in a car for $30,000, I'm not going to lose sleep over it for sure. So, in my opinion, really the crown jewel of this platform, the BRZ and 86, is the chassis. The engine is, in my opinion, a supportive feature of the handling characteristics of the car. So obviously you need to have enough power, and the power delivery needs to be good in a manner that makes the car fun to utilize the handling characteristics of the chassis, but the chassis is where it's at. On the previous gen cars, the chassis was very stiff. The weight distribution was almost perfect 50-50. There was very little body roll. On the old cars, I never felt cowl shake. The car never felt like a wet noodle like some cars can. And now with the new refined platform, Subaru has really improved on a lot of that, which I didn't even think really needed a lot of improving. So the torsional rigidity of this platform now is a full 50% stiffer than the last car, which is a big improvement. If you look at a cross-section diagram of the car, you really get an idea for how low the engine and transmission, all the main powertrain components, are in the car. And what that gives us is a very low center of gravity. So when you turn, you don't have that sort of pendulum motion up high making the car want to roll around. The center of gravity on this one, Subaru improved by lowering it a full inch, which is pretty incredible. So the center of gravity on this car is actually lower than a C8 Corvette or a 718 Cayman. And all that for $30,000. It's pretty remarkable. So they decided to keep the same brakes. So they're 11.6 inches in the front, 11.4 inches in the rear. So there are 2-pot calipers in the front, single pots in the rear, and the brake feel is really good. I was always happy with the brake feel of the old car, even considering their slider style calipers. On my last BRZ, I took the car right to the racetrack, completely stock, and it held up for an entire track day. And the pedal got a little bit soft. There was a little bit of pad fade by the end, but good pad and good fluid, and those were solved for all the subsequent track days. So we have a low center of gravity, nicely stiff suspension, very good weight distribution front to rear, and basically what we wind up with is a car that handles extremely well. It doesn't overload the front tires, you don't get a lot of understeer. You can adjust the angle of the car precisely with the throttle, which is a very nice and welcome thing. Makes it really fun to drive. I found with the last car on the track that I could drive the car a little bit more how I wanted to drive it, and it really didn't complain. With the STI, in all fairness, was a solid 3 seconds a lap faster around our local racetrack, which is only 1.5 miles. So it's a noticeable reduction in lap time, but the STI was just never as much fun to drive on the track. With the STI, it was very easy to overload the front tires, and then they would overheat, and then it would sort of magnify the understeer that you could get. To drive around and just try to not understeer to the point where you're overloading and overheating the front tires really isn't as rewarding as the last BRZ that I had. That car, I could take it on the track and I could drive it more how I wanted to, and the car didn't complain. Subaru opted to keep the same gearbox in this car, so it's a 6-speed, and the ratios are all identical to the first gen car. The final drive in the rear is also the same from the early bunch of years of the first gen BRZ, and they kept the torsion diff. The torsion diff makes an enormous difference for the car. I've never driven a car with any kind of electronic LSD or a viscous rear, any other kind of hokey limited slips. It just doesn't seem to have the same direct feel. This car is phenomenal. It's nice too. The gear ratios, the spacing, I think is about perfect. And really the only gear where you have a larger jump is from 5th to 6th, which reportedly happens around 128 miles per hour or so. But I would rather have a big drop from 5th to 6th at 128, where I'm not going to be doing that too often, as opposed to, like, say the early 5-speed WXs where you had a big drop from 1st to 2nd, which you do all the time. So if they're going to put a bigger space in a gear and keep the rest of them close, I'm glad they opted to do it that way. Well, so there you have it, a breakdown of the differences and changes that Subaru has made to the car, and my comparison between the old one and the new one, and a lot of the reasons why I think that this is the best sports car that you can buy for $30,000. It's a fantastic car. The previous one that I had was my favorite car that I've ever owned, and this car is quickly becoming my favorite car that I've ever owned. So here we are back at the shop. So what's next? We're gonna put an exhaust on it in the next video, and we've got some track days coming up, and we're gonna have a lot more fun. So let's park this thing. There you have it. The car is obviously pretty awesome stock, but we're going to do a lot of mods to it in future videos and take it to the track. Thanks for watching.